cemetery. It has to happen. Otherwise, they're gonna chase us out of here.
Well, that's
Now, my father's dead 30 years. He said the Chichester should be dredged out from Chichester all the way down to the Esopus Creek. If you look at the Chichester stream, some places you look eye level with it. It has to be taken down.
It's interesting because in other places along Stony Clove, we've actually done work. It's done just the opposite. When a riverbed is degrading, it's going, we call it incising, it's actually going down, or if there's something, and on the sheets are in the back room, explains some of the stuff, what a head cut is. If any of you are familiar with the Walton area in Delaware, they had a big flood and they dredged, and what they did it in a way that left the system very unstable, and a head cut developed where the river was unraveling and down cutting, and when it did that, it started taking out all of the banks on the stream because they became too steep. We've done some massive bank stabilization projects on the Stony Clove that have deposited massive amounts of sediment that you've been the recipients of. So part of that has been aimed at keeping that erosion from happening and dumping itself back into the stream to fill in under your bridges and your creeks. So one of the things that we're going to try really hard to do is to not limit ourselves to anything, to look at all of the sources of flooding, but also the sources of sediment and of the trees. And it's...
And you're talking about Chichester, Knapp's Hole up there, what was it, 8-9 feet deep? They used to dive in there off the rocks. What is it now, about a foot?
If it's scouring from one area, it's filling in another. So, you're looking at areas that used to be the holes, and now the
leading hole.
erosion from upstream is now, dumping itself on, and you're the recipient.
Yeah, the railroad trestle. These are all, it's gone. I don't see where you see this. I just don't see it.
Well, what's happening too is a lot of the banks are eroding and also dumping. What I'm saying is you've got a lot of sediment coming
They
your
have to
way.
be protected, the banks. That's all. Years ago, we had the railroad that used to keep the banks. Well, go ahead, what this woman? Go ahead.
Hi. I have often wondered why you can't just take bulldozers in there and have one bulldozer go this way deep and then push it up on the side. The other bulldozer come behind and go deep and up on this side. And then you wouldn't have weak banks, you would have gravel banks, and you would be deeper in the middle and higher on the side.
Well, one thing that can happen, and this is, again, something you need to be careful of, it's different for every river. You have what's a natural riverbed. It's usually got cobbles and boulders, and it's really thick stuff. One of the things that you need to be very careful of, whether you're at a bridge or you're in a river, if you go too deep and too high on the banks, two different things you need to worry about and at least consider. One is you can punch through what the natural riverbed is. Now, I'm not talking, after you get through all the stuff that's deposited, I'm talking going deeper, and that deeper is not always better, because what you can do is you can punch through that cobble bed, and now you're into clay. And anyone who's seen these rivers flow know that they flow chocolate milk. And if you get beyond that, now you're going to be in a situation where you're creating a worse situation. The other thing that you really need to be careful of is as you go deeper, your banks get steeper and steeper, and they can undermine at the toe, and now you've got a lot of gravel going in. So it's just about balance.
Well, I didn't say go 50 feet deep.
No. Also, if you remember the cross sections I showed. There's a certain area to that cross section. It passes a certain flow. If you take gravel from down here and put it on the sides, and you get a flood, you've moved material around, but you haven't increased the size of the channel. So it's going to pass the same amount of water that it did before. It's also going to mobilize those sediments that you've taken and put on the sides, because now they're being flooded, and it's going to bring them downstream.
I guess the moral of the story is some sediment excavation can be very beneficial, and we're going to look at it. More isn't always better, and you have to figure out where that balance lies. But the other thing that we often forget about is the power of the floodplain. Well, when the floodplain is our backyard, that's not necessarily a good thing. But floodplains in natural systems, so the river, here's the cross section. Now we're standing in the middle of the river. This is where the water normally is, and then you've got the banks. What a floodplain in a natural system is like, it kind of goes like this, and then kind of goes up, and now you're on high ground. This area that's normally dry, but that isn't filled with with development, in an extreme flood, that river can come up and over, and it has sort of a relief valve to flow downstream. Now, if your entire town, your entire development, your village is on that floodplain, well, you can't just say, okay, everybody get up and move. But there are opportunities sometimes when you don't have buildings and roads and things of that sort, piping and infrastructure, bridges, where you can kind of give that flow area, the river, a bit of a relief valve. So sometimes it's a combination of taking sediment out, building a little more buffer on the floodplain, or what we call the compound channel. We'll talk about that. I think we may have a graphic in there about that. And so generally, we rarely find a situation where there's one solution and that takes care of all the problems. It's usually a combination of things. And what we'll do is we'll look at each one of them individually, and then we'll look at them in combination. And we'll come back and we'll say, this is what happens if you dig this river 5 feet deep, 8 feet deep, if you go out wider, if you replace this bridge. And then we'll start piling things on each other as we see how the modeling is telling us what is happening with the water surface elevation. So all ideas are good ideas, and then we need to look at them to figure out which ones work.
I can see that the consensus amongst most people here, that it should be dredged at least like maybe say 1 to 2 feet deeper all throughout the channel, you know, because this is how much you build up all around, you know. I mean, it's too shallow.
Yeah, there's a few in the back that we haven't heard from.
Just by way of observation, what this lady suggested, you dig the channel deeper, arm the banks, make the bank side. It's basically what the Army Corps of Engineers has been doing to the Mississippi River in the last 50, 100 years, and they have been undergoing historic floods every 2 or 3 years in the Mississippi River. Just that concept has not worked in Mississippi, and it's destroyed thousands of acres of wildland.
Yeah, the other gentleman in the back.
My name's Harry Jameson. I own 3 properties on Bridge Street, all of which have been flooded. And I've done business on the Esopus Creek with Whitewater Recreation for the past 35 years. And I'm also a member of the Shandaken Watershed Management Plan, and as a member of the Recreation Access Committee. One of the things that I've seen over the years is people trying to put together a plan that's going to fix something, and that's going to be the end of it. And that's never going to happen here in this watershed. All of the things that we've been able to live with here, and the way we've survived, is by maintaining. If you go ahead and you put a roof on your house, it's going to last 25 years, maybe 30 years. But eventually, you're going to have to do it over. And the point being is that everybody's comments here about dredging or removing the gravel are exactly on point. We are on a delta of till here in the Hamlet of Phoenicia that has come from the Stony Cove Notch for the last umpty-ump million years. I'm sure the river ran right here where we are standing. Now I'll go back to Mickey Simpson. A lot of people in this room knew Mickey. And at one point I was in his kitchen and we were watching some old movies and there was a clip. And I made him stop the movie and back it up. But what it was a steam shovel in the Stony Cove Creek, just above the Phoenicia Bridge, and it was removing the material. And I said, Mick, what is that? He said, well, they used to do that every 4 or 5 years because all the till slowly but surely migrated down. As the velocity of the water slows down, it drops the solids and it fills up the stream. Laws were propagated to eliminate dredging and the removal of that. And 2 of my properties, actually my parking lot was destroyed 3 times, 1996, 99 in Hurricane Floyd, and in 2005, not by the Esopus Creek, but by the floodwaters that breached onto 214 from the Stony Cove, went right down Main Street, found the point of lowest gravity, down Bridge Street, and right through my parking lot and through the Phoenicia Trailer Park. So the dredging and or material removal from the Stony Cove at this point has solved the problem. My parking lot will not flood, and Main Street won't flood. Okay. Also allowing more room for the volume of water also will slowly but surely, because the basements that are being flooded are basically the Stony Cove stream running under Phoenicia.
Right.
It's diatonaciously filtering itself right through. You can dig anywhere in town, go down 3-4 feet, and you need a 6-inch pump to keep it dry. Okay? Maintenance. Mount Tremper. In Mount Tremper, the Army Corps of Engineers built a berm down there, and they used federal funding to create a flood mitigation program. This is back in the early 60s. Having spent federal money to stabilize and help the community here, they went ahead and said, well, okay, there's going to be a maintenance need. We've created this berm in here. There's going to be a mitigation, a migration of till, and it's going to have to be removed on a periodic basis. And every 3 or 4 years, DEC would go down there and put excavators in there, and they would load as many trucks from towns, contractors, or whatever, who wanted to take that material and do something with it. And the end result was to continue the management of the project they had built. So whatever we do here, we cannot just say, okay, this is it, done, we're going to walk away, it'll be fine, we'll never have to address it again. We are going to have to maintain it. So if we do dredging, we can expect that it's going to fill back in and it's going to have to be removed again. That's with regards to stream bed elevation. With regards to flood damage, 9 times out of 10, when we hit velocities and volumes of water, now you're talking 29,000 CFS, Colebrook gauged in at 80,000. That's combined flow. That's Big Indian, Stony Clove, Woodland Valley, 80,000. They clocked the river moving at 45 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Okay? I don't remember the exact year, but at one point there was an occurrence, a rain occurrence, that dropped 7 inches of rain in Pine Hill in 4 hours.
86.
And there was some mapping done because I've been part of the process for all these years. And there was an aerial photograph of the upper Esopus. And you could see the stream went here and hit the bank, ricochet, 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 ricochet. Wherever it hit the bank, it just blew a hole in it. Mark, the slide you showed where the original profile of the bank was just above the
Right.
28 overpass,
Yep.
and now that big gouge in there, there's a curve in the stream.
Yep.
The water wants to go straight.
Yeah, the outside.
And the
of that.
Stony Clove comes there too.
Right, so the other thing that you have to do is you have to look at those points. Now, we're managing, I mean, if you look at historic rivers, how they sway, the older they get, the more they switch back. Ultimately, wherever there's a curve, there's going to be a problem when you get those velocities. So the only thing you can do is under the bank.
The point that you raised is really good. When we talk a lot tonight about flows, but velocities are, slow-moving water is not destructive. It's the high velocity, it's the thing that rolls the bus down the river.
Yeah.
And so one of the good things about the tools that we have doesn't just tell us how deep the water is going to be and where it's going to go, but how fast it's moving. And anything we can do, I love the garden hose thing. When you take your garden hose, it's coming out of the thing and you put your thumb over it, water starts spouting out much faster because it's flowing through a more restricted area. So when we restrict our rivers by building right up to the edges of them and giving them and putting bridges over them that are going to restrict them, now we've got like this water hose just barreling water down there. So the other thing that we need to, and once it hits a meander or a bank, it's at a very high velocity, it's going to blow through and it's going to cause more gravel in your riverbed because it's eroding. A natural channel, you're absolutely right, you're going to see that it meanders. And what it does when it does this is it loses a lot of what we call its energy. It slows down its velocity because we've got a rougher, sort of more area for it to have to go over, and it becomes slower because there's more friction against it. So as much as we talk about flow area and flow rates, we also need to look at velocities, and that's something we're going to look very carefully at. Because when you have, you could stand in a water that is flowing at 1 or 2 feet per second. That's not too hard. it would mow me over if I were standing in the middle of a river, even if you know, hit by a wave that's flying at the beach, even if you're only up to your knees and you've got 15, 18 feet per second, you're not standing in that. And that's the kind of velocities that we really need to be concerned about. What are we gonna find in the Stony Clove? What are we gonna find in the Esopus? We'll share that with you next time, but that's certainly something that we need to be very, very mindful of as we go through. So it's a really good point.
Yeah. And, you know, since I started business, in 1980 there was a flood, 83 there was a flood, 87 there was a flood, 91 there was a flood, 96 there was a flood, 99 Hurricane Irene, 2004 Hurricane Floyd, 2005, and then Irene was the bigger. And they continued to get more aggressive, you know, the intensity level and the amount of work is becoming more and more. But if you look at, you know, having worked the river, every flood hits the same spot and just digs a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. That spot underneath Route 28 overpass first occurred in 1980. It washed the ballast out from the roadbed on the railroad, and then in 83 came along, took a little bit more, and you know, it just progresses. Thank you.
I'd like to get you to, the way you describe the flow is coming across Bridge Street there. When we look at the maps later, if you could just show me that sort of information is really helpful when we work with our models to understand what happens, because it's not always obvious.
This gentleman up front has been very patient, yes.
Okay, I got a question. Isn't there some kind of machine, seismic machine or something that can tell you what's under the bed? Because I don't think you're gonna dig down and hit clay. You're gonna hit rocks as far as you go.
Depends on where you are. We're doing a project, I'm thinking Warner Creek.
Yeah, the Warner Creek confluence with Stony Clove. And there's quite a bit of clay, and there's also rock. It just depends on where you are. Some
That is
areas there's clay.
not anything that we're gonna find as part of the study. I mean, that's just not even anything that we can begin to look
I mean,
at.
machines that the oil companies use to
You could drill,
seismically look under there, because I don't think there's gonna be clay under there.
there is an awful lot of clay from what we've seen in nearby areas. And you can drill holes and actually do little corings to see what is under there. But our job is gonna be to keep water from getting either on the banks or on the riverbed intersecting with clay, because that's when you have your chocolate milk. Eric, were you gonna?
We were dredging the Stony Clove right by the firehouse.
Yep.
Only a few feet under the gravel. Yes, right behind the town hall, we're replacing the wall behind the town Shandaken town hall, replacing like that foot under the gravel.
Yeah, there really
It's
is.
not that deep.
I know it seems like there's probably a lot of rock, but the more typical thing we see is in layers, we see the sediment that's been deposited, and then you've got your layer of your river cobble, which is where your river really wants to be. From a natural, sustainable equilibrium point, that's where your river wants to be. You're really fighting uphill battle both ways if you try and fight nature. And then under that, what we've seen in the Stony Clove and in the Esopus is an awful lot of clay. And clay is like blowing a dandelion that's gone by. I mean, water will take that and just blow through it like anything. So you really do want to get to a cobble bed that could be somewhat sustainable. And in some areas where you have very, very high velocities, we've seen these rivers move cobbles the size of Volkswagens. I don't think we're going to see that here because I think we're a lot flatter, but I mean, you do need to figure out what that balance is.
But just if you go about 2 miles up Stony Clove, you're on bedrock.
Yeah.
There's all bedrock bed there, so it's variable. Depends on where you are.
It is.
You know, you get, I don't know, maybe 2 miles up from the confluence. You can see it as you drive up 214 there. It's all exposed bedrock in the bed, but then once you cross 214 again, then it goes off of the bedrock, so it's variable.
It's great that there's some thinking about a long-term plan and evaluating different strategies, but I'm curious how we should relate to this conversation as individual property owners, maintainers. For example, my home is in that patch of land that he was just talking about, where all the trees and the springside's been completely destabilized, and now the land under my backyard is just being scooped away. And I can't wait and see, you know, when my house is gonna fall in the creek, I'm gonna have to do something. So how should a person like me, and there are many of us, my neighbors would be in the same position, how should we relate to this process? Should we consult you before we go ahead? Should we make sure our contractor does that? Do you want to look at the property and throw in a suggestion? Like he said, everything that's been done on the stream around me and across from me has thrown the water. First it threw it to me, now it's thrown it to the other side, and I would like not to act alone. I would rather whatever repair I'm doing bears some relationship to what's good for the people across from me and next to me, but I can't take on that responsibility.
And no one can afford single-handedly to make the kind of changes that would have great impacts or good impacts for people. What I would recommend is, if you can sit tight for a little while, one of the things we really hope to do is get very much down into the weeds and make this about the actual land, and hopefully we will be able to get down to the maps. The next time we come back, I expect that we'll have a lot of information that will be educational, that will be walking you through what we've seen, what we've analyzed. We have just begun. We really are at the very beginning point. This is what we see, and we can actually look at, you know, Google Earth images of areas where we say, this is what we see as the issue here. This is what is likely going to happen here. This is the kind of thing that you can spend a lot of money and do a lot of, and it won't do you any good. This is the kind of thing that you can spend a lot of money and it will. So hopefully, not that we're going to be able to do a parcel by parcel analysis, but we're going to be able to bring to this conversation information for you and your neighbors in terms of, you know, what are the options and what things can you do as an individual homeowner, and what can the community do at large in terms of the bigger picture thing. And we would like to think that we're going to try and answer both questions. And then I have to be very real with you. There will be some properties and some structures where the best you can say is, it's just a really bad place to be. And the best thing you can do is get out. Try to find one of the funding programs that will, you know, buy you, move you, whatever, or accept that you are going to be vulnerable for all of time. We've had a couple of projects where individual homes were in the floodway. Now there's the floodplain, which is what floods, and then there's the floodway, which is the major highway of the water. And if you're in that floodway, there's very little to anything you can do to really protect yourself. So we'll try and let you know where you are and what the options are, and some of the news will be good, and some of it may not be so good.
Are you funded by the city of New York?
This project is funded our contract is with the town of Shandaken.
Yeah, but is the city involved in this in any way?
It's
Who are you looking at?
no, I thought Rob was going to say something.
Yes, the town of Shandaken is funding this project. We received the grant through the Cornell Cooperative Extension, through the SNP grant funding, which is,
Yeah, it's the Stream Management Implementation Program Grant Fund. It is money from New York City DEP. Cooperative Extension has a contract with New York City DEP, and they give us $2 million over 5 years to distribute grants to the communities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, why is the city doing this?
The origins of it really of this particular program, local flood analysis, go back to Irene. And after Irene, the counties stepped forward, particularly county soil and water districts. And within the New York City watershed got together and said to DEP, we would like to see more of the funds that you're using for stream management be applied to flood mitigation than in the past. And so that's where this program came from.
Okay. Now, the city, of course, you have the Gilboa Reservoir that runs into the Sulpus. We're in, and everything goes down to the Shandaken. Now, the reason why the city, I'm sure, is involved in this because they control all the water through the town of Shandaken, right?
Not all the water through.
Or no? Doesn't all this water go into the Shandaken?
You mean from the tunnel? The tunnel from the.
No, I'm talking about not only the tunnel, but all the water, all these tributaries that go into the Sulpus go into the Shandaken.
Then they might like to control it, but they don't. They don't control the water in
Controls
this. I'm not sure, yeah.
DEP controls the water through here. They have certain restrictions.
That's in owns
There-
it.
It's really,
No?
it's really New York State Department of Environmental Conservation that regulates what
Okay.
happens in streams, because they, you know, act on behalf of the legislature, they're implementing Clean Water Act from the federal level and state law.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
It's
but
DEC.
also, this water all goes into the Ashokan, which then
Yeah.
goes down to New York City.
Right.
So New York City should be doing something to protect their water.
So one of the,
Other than restrictions that people should know, they're gonna have to leave, and this one's gonna have to, they're gonna have to protect it in a better way, like they do in California, where they're really having a rough time now. But everything out there is protected with, all their stream banks and everything are protected. Not like here, they should put concrete walls up here. Don't tell me you can't do it. This is concrete walls to protect the banks and have a walkway with the steps going down. They could do this. They have the money to do this. This is what should be doing, rather than we're gonna, part of the people are gonna have to leave, or this one. This is the way I look at it. Am I wrong? Well, you're from Mississippi. You know, Mississippi River.
To that point, I was on a jury. I was on a jury some years ago where the DEC was suing one of our local people for getting in the creek. And their lawyer opened up by saying every drop of water, the DEC's lawyer, every drop of water is owned by the DEC before it hits the ground. And we're allowed to borrow it if we clean it up before we put it back.
that's an interesting legal perspective. One thing I will say though,
That's their view.
to the gentleman who was just speaking, one thing that we can find some common ground around is that flooding is actually very bad for the water quality of the Ashokan Reservoir and other water supply. Because with it comes the errant propane tanks, the sediment that gets scoured from the banks. So there really is a common ground in terms of managing sustainable floods. I will tell you, there's not going to be a whole lot of support anywhere for funding construction or permitting, 10-foot walls that are concrete that go up. We'd much rather solve the problem in a way that looks a lot more like nature, if we can. So I think there's
Well,
room
when you
for.
go through 8 or 10 floods, and you think you're gonna die, you change your mind, believe me.
I think
When you're
that.
stuck right in town here, and the water goes up, you've got nowhere to go, and all these people are gone, and you're there by yourself, you have a different perspective, believe me.
It is absolutely a grave situation, no questions asked. My only point is, I think that we can find some common ground to try and fix the
Not
problem.
with me, you can't.
Don't argue.
Okay,
Question.
yes.
Can your modeling take advantage of the head cuts and use them to advantage? Can your modeling,
No, I was trying to say, wouldn't you use them to?
using or creating head cuts to advantage, in other words, use the force of the stream in your modeling to clear itself in such a... I've seen it done in West Virginia.
Generally, head cuts are going to produce far more sediment than they are going to clean out. What you're doing is you're taking the bed material out of the river, out of this location, and you're putting it in another one. You're just moving the problem downstream. So basically, you're going to have all your neighbors downstream flooding instead of you when it comes to head cuts and
Yeah, actually, they touched on something which is actually what we did, and with your help, in Estonia, just putting in stream structures.
yes.
Weirs, and J-hooks and so on, built of stone and boulders within a stream bed that would promote scour under the bridge, which is exactly what was structured, or we're hoping that structure does down in the Stony Brook. I certainly hope that one of the things we're going to look at is trying to do similar structuring throughout the entire Soapus Creek stretch in order to get that sediment to move along as well,
Right.
to where we can find places where maybe sediment harvesting can take place and control the
Right, so
environment.
you're talking about is a stream that is self-maintaining to move sediment through as opposed to accumulate it. A head cut is a little bit different because that's when you've got a stream that's dynamically degrading as opposed to passing sediment through.
One of the things we just fixed up in Upper Stone Cove.
Exactly. Exactly. With that, I think maybe what we can do is sort of break a little less formally and go over and we'll stay as long as we need to talk to as many of you as information.